The stars over Cadia were not as they once had been. Once they had burned with the bright, defiant light of a garrison world that had never fallen. Now they hung dim and weary in the night, their glow thinned as if the void itself had grown tired. The heavens were fractured, riven by the slow, patient pulse of the eye of terror. Great rivers of warp light coiled and uncoiled in the black, curling like the fingers of a hand that had waited 10,000 years to close around the throat of the galaxy. The air over the Casa of Ver carried the faint metallic tang of the shield arrays, those colossal bastions humming endlessly against the cold. Below, the fortress city slept in its uneasy half-light, every gun emplacement manned even in the dead hours. Cadia did not know peace, only intervals between sieges. But tonight the quiet felt wrong. And before we begin this story, know this: we truly love and care for you. In a galaxy as grim and vast as this, where stars are born and die without witness, you matter. You are part of this night with me. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. Lord Castellan Varric Morn stood on the edge of the bastion wall, his heavy coat stirring in the wind, eyes fixed on the distant shimmer of the Cadian gate. He had commanded troops for more than a century, not through the slow turning of mortal years, but through the strange elongation of life granted to those few who bore the weight of this world's defense. It was not immortality, not truly, more like a curse of endurance. The body hardened, the mind sharpened, the years stretching thin but never quite breaking. That endurance was failing him now. A comms officer had reported earlier in the day that an astropathic signal, thought lost for nearly 4 centuries, had reached Cadia at last. An ancient distress call, its source long dead. The encryption bore the mark of the Legio Veri, a force that had been erased from the annals of the Guard before Morn's own birth. Its words were still being pieced together, but what little had been translated spoke of something buried deep, something older than the gate itself. Morn had listened in silence. Now he stared at the gate, that eternal storm in the void. The warp currents flickered unnaturally tonight, strange fractures of light darting between its edges like veins of ice on black glass. The eye had moods, and those who had lived on Cadia long enough could read them. Tonight it was expectant, as though it knew something he did not. Footsteps behind him, deliberate, unhurried. Still watching the storm, Lord Castellan? Commissar Elaine Drake's voice was as calm as ever, though she rarely came up here without reason. Her black greatcoat caught the wind like a banner, the silver aquila on her chest plate, catching the faint moonlight. It changes, Morn said, without turning. Not in its nature, but in its shape. You learn to notice. Tonight it waits. She moved to stand beside him, her eyes scanning the same horizon. The gate has been waiting for 10 millennia. Not like this. For a time, they stood in silence, the wind curling between the walls. Below them, the Casa's lamps glimmered faintly in neat martial lines. From here, Cadia looked indomitable. But Morn had walked those streets, seen the cracks in the ferrocrete, the worn edges of the defensive lines. An old fortress could be as fragile as any living thing. Tell me about the message, Dreg said finally. It's incomplete, Morn replied, but the parts we've decrypted. He paused, weighing his words. It speaks of a pact, something forged before the Imperium's birth, kept hidden, perhaps even from the throne itself. Dreg's gaze narrowed. A dangerous thing to believe, let alone repeat. I've not repeated it. Not yet. Her eyes searched his, reading the layers beneath. You think it's true? I think, Morn said slowly, that if it is, it would mean everything we have bled for rests on a lie. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked back at the gate, her jaw tightening. The truth has never saved a world, Castellan. Only guns and the will to use them. A sudden flare of light rippled across the eye, staining the stars an ugly violet. Morn felt the hairs rise on his neck, not from fear, but from recognition. It was a signal of movement, the kind the veterans could sense long before the augurs confirmed it. Something was stirring beyond the veil. A chime sounded from the wall vox. Lord Castellan, long-range scans detect warp translation signatures. Multiple. Vector suggests approach from beyond the gate. Morn's reply was level. Number? Too many to count, sir. The commissar's hand fell instinctively to the bolt pistol at her hip, though the enemy was still light years away. We've held before, she said. Morn's eyes stayed on the storm. And one day we will not. The only question is whether that day is now. Below them, the fortress began to stir. Sirens wailed in their deep, mournful pitch, echoing off the walls. Gun crews rushed to their stations. The endless night of Cadia had shifted into the first hour of readiness. The astropathic message was still unfinished, but one phrase had already been translated in full. The shield was bought, not given. Morn found his gaze drawn away from the gate, down to the sleeping city. He thought of the children in the casas, the unbroken lines of generations who had known nothing but service to the throne. If the truth in that message was real, if their ancestors had forged their survival not through purity of faith, but by bargaining with powers unspoken, then every oath sworn on this soil had been born from shadow, and yet the enemy was coming regardless. Ready the council, he said at last. Before the first shots are fired, there are things they must hear. Dreg's eyes flicked to him. All of them. All of them. As the storm beyond the gate swelled, Morn felt the familiar pull in his chest. The mingling of duty and doubt that had never left him. He had commanded through victories and pyres, through desperate retreats and impossible stands. But now, as the stars fractured under the warp's light, he understood something with a clarity that chilled him. This was not merely another siege. This was the first breath of the end. The wind that swept across Cadia's northern pole was not the same wind that blew over the casas. Here, it carried a sound that could not be mistaken for nature. The deep, unbroken hum of the planet's bones. The ice cliffs rose like the teeth of a sleeping giant, their faces sheer and blue, lit from within by the faint glimmer of buried fortifications. Beneath those cliffs lay tunnels older than the Imperium, sealed for so long that even the administratum records had been reduced to one line. Restricted, no access without High Lord authority. Lord Castellan Varak Morn stood at the mouth of one such tunnel, breath clouding in the air, the frost on his armor plates catching the pale light. Beside him, Commissar Elaine Dreg adjusted her rebreather, her eyes scanning the snowfields that rolled away behind them. Two squads of Kasrkin stood in disciplined silence, their lasguns lowered but ready. You're certain the signal originated here? Dreg's voice was muted through the mask, but her suspicion was not. Certain enough to drag us through the cold, Morn replied, not looking at her. The astropath said it came from under the ice, and if the Legio Veri were the ones who sent it, there's only one place they could have hidden. He stepped forward, boots crunching on the frost-coated steel of the tunnel threshold. As they passed inside, the change was immediate. The wind's howl faded into a dull, throbbing quiet. The walls, carved from both ice and ancient plasteel, glistened faintly under the beam of their helmet lamps. "This place predates the Cassars," Dreg murmured, "by millennia." "Long before Cadia was a fortress," Morn said, "before the first siege, before the throne." The further they went, the stranger the air became. It was still cold, but no longer in the natural way of ice and stone. It was the sterile cold of a vault that had never been opened. After an hour's descent, they reached the first chamber. It was vast, almost cathedral-like, the walls ribbed with ancient buttresses. The floor was a mosaic of metal plates engraved with symbols neither of them recognized, jagged, alien, yet strangely symmetrical. The Kasserkin fanned out, scanning for movement. One of them paused at a rusted control pillar, brushing away frost to reveal a panel of dead lights. "This was not built by humans," Dreg said flatly. Morn's eyes swept. The chamber. Number, but it was used by them. He pointed to the far wall, where the remains of a command dais stood, the sigil of the Imperial Aquila carved clumsily over whatever mark had been there before. Someone claimed it. Someone hid it. And then they heard it. Faint at first, so soft it could have been a trick of the mind. A voice. Not spoken aloud, but pressed directly into the ear of thought. The Kasserkin reacted instantly, weapons rising. Dreg drew her bolt pistol, eyes searching the shadows. "Stand fast," Morn ordered quietly. His own hand stayed at his side, though the sound was crawling under his skin. The voice did not speak words they could recognize. Not at first. It was a layered tone, as if several voices were speaking in unison, their cadence too measured to be noise. It resonated in the ribcage more than the ear, a vibration that seemed to pulse with the chamber itself. Dreg's brow furrowed beneath her visor. "It's asking. What? Questions. About time. About how long it's been." Morn's jaw tightened. The astropath's partial translation returned to him. The shield was bought, not given. The Kasserkin nearest the dais staggered suddenly, clutching his helmet as if to tear it off. His scream echoed like a blade across the ice, and then he collapsed. Blood ran from his nose and ears, freezing almost instantly on the plasteel. Dreg snapped her pistol toward the dais. "Whatever it is, it's killing us." "No," Morn said, his voice low. "It's testing us." The voice grew louder, clearer, though still in that unnatural harmony. The words were recognizable now, though halting and strange. "You hold the line. Still. Why?" The temperature seemed to drop further. Frost crept along the barrels of the Kasserkin's guns. Morn stepped forward, ignoring Dreg's warning glare. His voice was steady, carrying across the frozen vault. "Because it is ours, and no one will take it from us." A long pause. Then a sound that might have been laughter, not mocking, but curious. "The bargain holds then, even after the givers are gone." Something shifted in the ice above them. A groan like a glacier under strain. The ancient control pillar flickered weakly to life, bathing the chamber in a sickly pale light. On its surface, a map appeared, not of Cadia as it was now, but as it had been in another age. Whole continents unscarred by war, and beneath them, vast networks that were not human. Dreg's eyes widened. Warp suppression fields, massive ones. This is why the gate hasn't swallowed Cadia whole. "It wasn't the Emperor," Morn said softly. "It was them." Before Dreg could respond, the map flickered again, showing clusters of red where the suppression fields had failed. The pattern was clear. They were failing inward, toward the gate itself. The voice returned, fainter now. as though whatever spoke was receding. When the last light fades, the debt will be paid in full. And then the chamber went dark again. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the shallow breathing of the Kasrakin. "Castellan," Dreg said at last, "if this is true, the High Lords have kept us fighting for a lie. Every man, woman and child who's died here has done so believing it was for the throne," Morn finished. His gaze was still fixed on the dais. And maybe that's the only reason Cadia has stood this long. They made the climb back to the surface in grim quiet. Outside, the polar winds had risen, carrying fine needles of snow that stung the skin. In the distance, the Cadian gate flickered, a single violet pulse, like the blink of an eye. Something beyond the veil was awake. The sky over Casimirak burned with a false dawn. Not the clean light of morning, but the red flare of orbital re-entry. Fire washing the upper atmosphere as dropships cut through, their hulls streaked black from the void. The people in the streets paused to watch, their faces pale in the glow. No one cheered. Reinforcements on Cadia never came without a price. Lord Castellan Varag Morn stood in the upper gallery of the Cassa's command spire, hands clasped behind his back, watching the ships descend. Beside him, Commissar Elaine Dreg kept her gaze fixed on the same burning trail. "They're early," she said. "They're here because of what's moving beyond the gate," Morn replied. "No one rushes to Cadia for any other reason." A voice cut through the air behind them, warm but edged with command. "You sound almost disappointed, old friend." Morn turned. General Serikane was exactly as he remembered him. Tall, broad-shouldered, his black hair now streaked with grey, the medals on his breastplate polished to a mirror sheen. They had fought side by side in the first assault of Casa Partox, in the days when Morn had still believed the guards' banners were unbreakable. "Kine," Morn said evenly, "I thought you'd be on the Segmentum frontier, holding the other line. And leave you to carry this alone. Hardly." Kane crossed the chamber, his boots ringing on the steel floor, and clasped Morn's forearm with a soldier's grip. There was strength in it, but also a subtle testing, as if weighing the year's toll. "We've been sent to consolidate our forces. Orders from the High Lords themselves." Morn released him. "Consolidate where?" Kane's eyes didn't waver. "Cadia Prime. We're to withdraw from the outer defense rings. Focus on holding the fortress world itself." The words fell like a blade between them. Dreg's gaze snapped to Morn, but she said nothing. "Withdraw?" Morn repeated. "Those Cassas hold millions. If we abandon them, they'll fall regardless," Kane said, not unkindly. "You've seen the augur reports. The fleet's massing beyond the gate. We can't hold everywhere. Better to strengthen the heart than bleed ourselves dry at the edges." Morn's voice was low, dangerous. "The heart is nothing if the blood's already drained." Khan sighed, as if this conversation had played out in his mind before. "I don't like it either. But we serve the throne, Morn. Orders are orders." Dreg stepped forward, her tone sharp. "Orders from men who have never stood on this soil. They'll let Cadia die as long as it dies gloriously for their histories." Kane's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he turned back to Morn. "I need your agreement to begin the withdrawal. The Navy's ready to start extraction within the week." "You'll have my answer," Morn said, "when I've decided if it's worth giving." Kane's eyes hardened at that, but he inclined his head. "Very well, but the longer you hesitate, the weaker our position becomes." He left the gallery without another word, his footsteps fading into the hum of the command center below. Dreg waited until the door had sealed before speaking. He'll carry out the withdrawal with or without your approval, and if he does, those cassers will burn before the week is out. Morn looked back at the crimson sky. Then we must move before he does. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting orders. Morn dispatched scouts to reinforce the outer cassers even as Kane's troops arrived to begin dismantling their fortifications. In some sectors, soldiers loyal to each commander stood side by side on the same walls, waiting to see who would give the final command. Rumors spread faster than the orders. Word of an ancient message, of a hidden pact beneath the ice, began to ripple through the ranks. Quiet at first, then louder. Morn had told no one outside his most trusted circle, but Cadia had a way of pulling truth to the surface, like wreckage rising in a tide. On the fourth night, the first Casa fell. It began with a comms blackout. The fortress city of Casa Vela went silent just after nightfall. Its Vox relays cut mid-transmission. Navy ships in orbit reported seeing fire spreading through the streets, then nothing. By morning, the augurs showed only the faint heat signatures of smouldering rubble. When the survivors were found, a scattering of wounded, most too shocked to speak. Their accounts were confused. Some swore the Navy ships had withdrawn just as the first enemy landers appeared. Others claimed the guns on the upper wall had simply failed all at once, as if some unseen hand had reached into their firing chambers and stilled them. Morn stood in the command spire as the reports came in, his hands gripping the edge of the tactical table. Across from him, Kane watched with an unreadable expression. Vela was doomed, Kane said at last. Better it falls quickly than drag the rest of the line down with it. It wasn't doomed until someone made it so, Morn said. Kane's eyes flicked up to meet his. Careful, old friend. The words hung between them like frost in the air. That evening, Dreg found Morn alone in the Hall of Saints. The vaulted chamber was lit only by the pale glow of the memorial candles, their light flickering over the statues of Cadian heroes carved from stone and steel. Dust hung in the cold air, and the silence was thick enough to feel. "You should be resting," she said. "I can't," Morn replied. His gaze was fixed on one statue in particular, a woman in full guard armor, her bolt gun held across her chest, her expression carved in defiance. She died in the second siege of Partox, my first campaign as Castellan. We swore no Casa would ever be abandoned again. Dreg stepped closer. And yet Kine would have you abandon them all. Morn turned to her, his voice low. You saw what we found beneath the ice. You know the truth about why Cadia still stands. If the High Lords knew, they'd strip this world bare to erase it from history. Then perhaps, Dreg said carefully, it's not the High Lords we should be serving. The words lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Somewhere in the Casa, the warning sirens began to howl again. By dawn, the outer Casas of the Northern Ring were under siege. Morn ordered reinforcements, only to find that the Navy ships scheduled to deploy them had been redirected under Kane's authority. Standing on the wall, Morn watched the horizon darken with the dust clouds of advancing armor. The enemy was coming fast, their banners barely visible through the haze. He knew what it meant. Within days, the war would be at Cadia's heart, and this time, no saint would rise from the ashes. The twilight that settled over Casa Mirac was not a gentle dusk, but a muted shadow, the kind that seemed to swallow even the faintest flicker of hope. The walls once vibrant with the clangor of marching troops and the hum of machinery, now echoed only with whispers, soft, urgent, and laced with suspicion. Lord Castellan Varric Morn moved through the corridors of the command spire like a spectre. His heavy boots, usually a symbol of unyielding authority, now sounded hollow against the cold stone. The weight of the impending siege pressed upon him, not just from without, but from within. The fortress was fraying at its edges, and the enemy was not always visible on the horizon. In the shadows of the war rooms, Commissar Elaine Dreg conferred quietly with her trusted aides. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, flicked toward the doors as if expecting unseen ears. "The Kasrkin whisper of shadows among their officers," she said grimly. "An assassin's blade does not need the light to strike." Morn found her in one such alcove, their breaths mingling in the frigid air. "Tell me what you've learned." Dreg's voice lowered further. "The Officio Sabbatorum has sent one of their own, a silent watcher. He has uncovered hints of treachery at the highest levels. A member of your command council may be a traitor." Morn's jaw clenched. The truth was a blade sharper than any power sword. To face enemies without was to be expected. To find them within, among those sworn to defend, was a poison that could unravel even the strongest of wills. "Who?" he demanded, but Dreg only shook her head. "The assassin moves like a ghost, trusted by few, suspected by many." A silence fell between them, broken only by the distant clang of armaments being readied. The fortress prepared to bleed. Later, Morn convened a council, the chamber thick with tension. Generals and captains sat stiffly, eyes darting beneath furrowed brows. Kane's presence was a shadow in the room, his gaze steady but unreadable. "Reports of an assassin are unconfirmed," Kane said smoothly. "Paranoia breeds weakness. We cannot afford fractures now." "But fractures already exist," Drake countered, voice cold as ice. "Trust has been broken before the enemy's first blow." Morn watched the silent war playing out in their eyes, the clash of loyalty and doubt, friendship and suspicion. The council dissolved with no resolution, each man and woman retreating behind veils of duty and silence. That night, as the winds howled outside, Morn stood once more at the battlements. The eye of terror churned above, its greenish light casting long shadows. His thoughts turned to the message beneath the ice, the pact, the secret debt. The ghosts of those choices echoed in every whispered fear. Cadia stood on a knife's edge, balanced between salvation and ruin, and the whispers at the wall threatened to tip the scales. The dawn broke over Casa Mirak with the cold light of a dying sun. It spilled across shattered battlements and fractured walls, illuminating the scars of siege etched deep into Cadia's proud stone. The sky was bruised and heavy, a portent pressed into the very air. Here, on the edge of oblivion, the past and present collided with the cruel force of shattered oaths and broken trust. Lord Castellan Varric Morn sat alone in the dim glow of his command chamber, the weight of his office pressing like iron bands around his chest. His eyes, sharp and weary, stared down at the sealed letter that lay on the obsidian table before him. It bore the mark of the Officio Sabbatorum, the emblem of death whispered in shadow. The message within was brief, cold, and precise. "A member of your inner council has betrayed the cause. The price will be the fall of a casa, unless swift justice is served." Morn's fingers trembled, though he clenched his jaw to hide it. The betrayal was not unexpected. Suspicion had seeped into every corner of Cadia like a poison. But to know it was true was a blow that echoed in the marrow of his bones. He looked toward the window, where the Cadian gate shimmered with unnatural light. A wound in the fabric of reality that threatened to bleed chaos into the universe. The enemy was at the doorstep, but the rot within was far deadlier. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Commissar Elaine Dreg entered, her presence as steady and cold as the Kasrkin who guarded their lines. Her eyes held a storm of unspoken questions and hard truths. "We cannot afford hesitation, Castellan," she said quietly. "The traitor moves with purpose. They have already struck." Morn nodded. "I know. The Casa of Verlis lost its captain last night. Shot through the heart in his quarters. No witnesses." "An inside job," Drake said, voice low. "Only someone with clearance could move so freely." "The circle tightens," Morn murmured. "But so must our resolve." They spoke in hushed tones of loyalty fractured and trust broken, of oaths once sworn and now shattered like brittle glass. Each whispered name, each glance held a question. Who would betray their blood for power? Who would let Cadia fall to the darkness for personal gain? Days passed like a slow march toward doom. Morn found himself watching friends with new eyes, seeing shadows where once there was only light. The weight of command became a mantle of isolation. Every decision a knife's edge. In the command spire, alliances formed and broke with the shifting tides of suspicion. General Seric Kane's motives were questioned by some, whispered in quiet corners. His insistence on withdrawal from outer casas was seen by others as pragmatism, by some as betrayal. One evening, Dreg brought him a report, a record intercepted from a secret transmission. The voice was disguised, but the words were clear. "The shield will crack. The price is paid in blood." Morn read the words twice before looking up, eyes aflame with bitter resolve. "Then we will make sure the price is counted." He summoned a council under tight security, the chamber filled with grim faces and clenched fists. The accusations were sharp, the tension palpable. Secrets spilled like poison, and old friends found themselves as enemies. In the end, Morn made a choice no leader wishes to face. A trusted captain was arrested, accused of collusion with the enemy. The man's eyes were hollow, betraying no plea, but a quiet acceptance of fate. As the prisoner was taken away, Drake leaned close. "You believe he's guilty?" Morn's voice was barely a whisper. "I believe the truth is a blade with two edges, and sometimes it cuts the innocent as deeply as the guilty." That night, Morn stood alone on the ramparts, watching the stars fade behind the ice storm. The shattered oath of loyalty weighed heavily. Cadia might yet survive, but only if the sins of the past could be faced and the price of betrayal paid in full. The horizon burned with a cold light, faint at first, like the last glimmer of a star on the brink of collapse. Across Cadia's scarred surface, the drums of war grew louder, their echoes carried on the biting wind. The eye of terror pulsed, a living wound in the fabric of reality, and through its storm poured fleets of shadow and fire. Lord Castellan Varric Morn stood at the helm of the command spire, his silhouette etched against the vast viewport that framed the swirling maelstrom beyond the Cadian gate. His face was a map of exhaustion, lines carved by years of battle and burden, eyes reflecting a storm within that rivaled the one before him. The armies of the Imperium amassed in grim determination, but Morn knew that even the greatest fleet could not hold forever against the tide that now pressed inward. The ancient pact whispered beneath the ice, the bargain made and forgotten, had begun to unravel. The warp currents tore at the suppression fields, fracturing the fragile barrier that had held back annihilation for millennia. Beside him, Commissar Elaine Dreg studied the strategic displays, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Enemy vessels are massing along multiple vectors. Their numbers outstrip our forces by at least 3-1. Morn's gaze did not waver. Then we shall fight like the world depends on it, because it does. But even as preparations went into overdrive, the shadow of betrayal lingered. The council was fractured. Suspicion had set root like a poison in the veins of command. Trust, once the bedrock of their strength, now splintered into shards of doubt and fear. Reports came in of dissent among the ranks, officers questioning orders, men disappearing in the night, whispers of dark pacts forged in desperation. Each message was a thread unraveling the tapestry of unity. Morn's own mind was a battlefield, every decision carved deeper into his soul. Was the enemy beyond the gate their greatest threat, or was the rot within waiting to bring the fortress down from the inside? A sudden alarm shattered the tension. The scanners picked up an incursion force breaking through the outer defense ring. Drop pods crashed into the soil like thunder, and the first explosions echoed through the valleys. "Deploy the Kasrkin," Morn commanded. "Hold the line, no matter the cost." Dreg's voice was calm but fierce. "Cadia has stood against the impossible before. This storm will not be the one that breaks us." As the defenders rallied, Morn turned back to the viewport, the swirling chaos of the warp storm reflected in his eyes. The price of the ancient bargain was coming due, and when it did, there would be no sanctuary, only sacrifice, betrayal, and the relentless march of fate. The gathering storm was no longer distant. It was here. The sky above Casamirak bled with fire. The once steady dawn was shattered by streaks of plasma and the roar of bolter fire, a symphony of destruction echoing through the shattered valleys and crumbling casas. The enemy surged forward with relentless fury, a tide of hatred and malice crashing against Cadia's battered defences. Lord Castellan Varak Morn stood amidst the chaos, the ground trembling beneath his boots as artillery shells tore the earth apart. His eyes, hard and unyielding, surveyed the front line where the Kasrkin fought with desperate valour. Each breath a defiant promise to stand or die. Beside him, Commissar Elaine Dreg moved like a ghost through the blood-soaked battlefield, her voice cutting through the cacophony with orders sharp as blades. The soldiers trusted her steel will as much as their own armour. Without it, the tide might have broken long ago. But the true enemy was not just the Xeno swarm clawing at their gates. It was the shadow festering within. Morn's mind reeled with the knowledge of traitors embedded deep in their ranks. Friend turned on friend. Whispers of sabotage and betrayal seeped into every corner like a slow poison. Supplies vanished, defenses failed without explanation, and morale teetered on the edge of collapse. In the command spire, a report arrived that chilled even the hardened Castellan. The fortress of Casavaris had fallen from within. Its commander, once a trusted ally, had opened the gates to the enemy in exchange for promises of power whispered in the dark. Morn's fists clenched until his knuckles whitened. The blood price of survival was rising, and it demanded a terrible toll. He summoned his closest officers, those still untainted, to a war council beneath the shattered dome. The air was thick with smoke and despair, but also the grim resolve of those who would not bow. Cadia will not fall by the hand of traitors alone, Morn declared. We stand on the edge of oblivion, and the cost will be paid in blood. Ours, theirs, and the lost souls caught between. Dreg stepped forward, her eyes blazing. We will root out the poison. Every whisper, every shadow, every broken oath will be met with fire and steel. The council agreed, but even in their fierce determination lay the bitter truth. Some sacrifices could not be undone. Some betrayals cut too deep. As the battle raged on outside, Morn found himself haunted by memories of oaths once sworn, and the faces of those who had broken them. The line between friend and foe blurred in the crimson haze. Night fell with the screams of the dying echoing across the plains. The stars above seemed distant and indifferent, watching silently as Cadia paid its blood price. The sky above Cadia had turned a sickly shade of iron and ash, as if the very heavens mourned the endless war that ravaged the world below. Thick clouds churned with unnatural energy, casting jagged shadows across the shattered chasms and scarred plains. The air was heavy, electric, a foreboding storm pressing in from every side. Lord Castellan Varric Morn stood atop the battered ramparts of Casa Mirac, his breath visible in the cold air. Around him, the fortress world's defenders prepared for the next onslaught, wearied, determined and haunted by the betrayals that had already cost them so much. His armor, dented and scorched, bore silent testament to the countless battles fought and the weight of endless responsibility. Beside him, Commissar Elaine Dregg's gaze was fixed on the horizon, where enemy war machines loomed like dark leviathans. "The enemy's fury grows," she said softly, "but so does the darkness within our own walls." Morn nodded grimly. "The traitor's poison spreads faster than the Xeno swarm. It threatens to consume us from within." Within the command spire, whispers twisted like vipers. Factions formed in shadowed corners. Accusations hung like smoke in the air. The council fractures widened with every passing hour. General Seric Kane's pragmatism was now viewed as cold calculation, some branding him a willing hand in Cadia's undoing. The tension erupted when a sudden explosion shook the lower levels of the spire, an act of sabotage that destroyed vital communication relays and severed links with several casas. Panic flared, but Morn's voice cut through the chaos. "Steady. We will not let our home fall to fear or treachery." He ordered swift reprisals, but the enemy was relentless, pressing harder where the defenses faltered. The Cadian gate flickered erratically, the warp storms clawing at its fragile seams. As night descended beneath the blackened sky, Morn withdrew to the Hall of Saints, a place sacred and somber. The flickering candles cast long shadows over statues of heroes past, their stone faces carved in eternal vigilance. Kneeling before the statue of Saint Elian, the first Castellan, Morn whispered a prayer lost to the ages. The cost of survival weighed heavily upon him. The sacrifices made, the friends lost, the betrayals endured. The sky cracked with distant thunder as if the universe itself wept for Cadia. In that dark hour, Morn understood that the battle was no longer just for survival. It was for the soul of an empire teetering on the edge of oblivion. The night on Cadia was a cloak woven from shadows and secrets. Beneath the blackened sky, the fortress world's defenders fought not only against the endless tide beyond the walls, but against a more insidious threat, one born of whispered lies and sharpened blades in the dark. Lord Castellan Varric Morn moved cautiously through the dim corridors of Casa Mirac. The air was thick with tension. Every step echoed like a heartbeat of dread. He was a man burdened by the weight of command, yet the betrayal cutting closest was not from the enemy without, but from the allies within. The latest intelligence from Commissar Elaine Dregg had confirmed his worst fears. A trusted aide had vanished without trace, suspected of passing secrets to the enemy. The Council's fragile unity was splintering, and Morn knew that the enemy's blade often found its mark most easily in the back. In the war room, maps and holograms flickered, displaying the shifting fronts of battle. Kane's troops were repositioning under the guise of strategic necessity, but many whispered that their true intent was to consolidate power and perhaps to bury inconvenient truths. Morn's eyes hardened as he confronted the bitter reality. "We cannot fight the enemy and the shadows at the same time," he muttered. And yet, here we are. Dreg appeared at his side, her expression grim. The saboteurs grow bolder. Last night, an entire ammo depot was destroyed. Hundreds dead before the assault even began. He nodded, the taste of betrayal bitter on his tongue. The knife in the dark is the deadliest. That evening, as a cold wind rattled the fortress's ancient stones, Morn convened a secret meeting with those he still trusted implicitly. Among them were the steely-eyed Captain Varys, whose loyalty was unshakable despite the fall of his casa, and the enigmatic astropath Lysandra, whose visions had grown darker with each passing day. "We must root out the traitors," Morn declared, voice low but fierce. "If we fall divided, the enemy will devour us all." Lysandra's gaze was distant. "The shadows we face are not all mortal. The warp stirs, and with it, whispers of madness and despair." Varys clenched his fists. "Then we hunt them down. No mercy." Morn's heart ached with the knowledge that some sacrifices were inevitable. Friends would be lost, not just to death, but to suspicion and exile. Yet he steeled himself. The fate of Cadia demanded no less. Outside, the enemy advanced under the blackened sky, oblivious to the deadly storm brewing within. The fires that burned along the Cadian gate were not born of flame alone, but of desperation and shattered hopes. The ancient fortress world trembled beneath the weight of war, its battered walls glowing red in the hellish light of incoming bombardment. The air was thick with smoke and ash, a suffocating reminder of the price of survival. Lord Castellan Varric Morn stood amidst the chaos, his armor streaked with grime and blood. Around him, the defenders of Cadia fought with a fury born of despair. Each bolter shot a prayer, each charge a testament to a world unwilling to surrender. The enemy's assault was relentless. Waves of twisted Xenos and corrupted traitors surged forward, clawing at the fortress's heart. The warp itself seemed to writhe in agony as the battle raged, a storm of psychic fury tearing at the souls of the living. Within the command spire, tension boiled over. The council was fractured, with accusations hurled like weapons sharper than blades. General Seric Kane's decision to consolidate forces at the gate was both praised and damned. Some saw it as necessary, others as a betrayal of the outer casas sacrificed to the flames. Morn's gaze hardened as he addressed his officers. "This is the final stand. The gate will not fall while I draw breath." Commissar Elaine Dreg's voice cut through the din. "The traitors among us must be rooted out before they tear us apart from within." Suddenly, the spire shuddered as a heavy explosion rocked its foundations. Communications flickered and died. The Avi enemy had struck again, severing links to vital outposts. Morn's mind raced. The enemy's strategy was clear. Break Cadia's will by destroying its heart. He turned to Dreg. "We must seal the cracks before the whole world collapses." The defenders rallied, pushing back with desperate might. Bolters roared and chain swords whirred as the enemy's tide was met with unyielding steel. Yet in the shadows, unseen hands moved. Betrayal was a blade that cut deepest where the light failed to reach. As the gate burned and bled, Morn understood the cruel truth. Survival demanded sacrifices that no one could fully bear. The day dawned heavy with ash and iron. The sky over Casavela was a choked canvas of smoke and dust, pierced only by the dull gleam of distant artillery fire. The fortress city, once a bastion of hope and steel, now lay fractured, its walls cracked, its streets scarred by the relentless hammer of war. The scent of burning promethium hung thick in the air, mingling with the bitter tang of blood and sweat. Lord Castellan Varrock Morn stood on the battered parapet, his cloak torn and dirtied, gaze fixed upon the shattered horizon. The city's defenders moved like ghosts through the ruins, their faces grim with exhaustion and grief. Every fallen comrade was a wound carved deep into the heart of Cadia. Commissar Elaine Dregg approached, her expression somber. "Casavela has fallen," she said quietly. "The enemy's breach was too swift, too precise." Morn nodded, his jaw clenched against the weight of failure. "A wound that will bleed for us all." The loss was not merely strategic, it was symbolic. Casavela was a fortress steeped in history, the site of countless sacrifices. Its fall was a fracture in the soul of Cadia itself. Inside the command chamber, Morn and his officers gathered, the air thick with tension and despair. Reports flowed in of scattered resistance, last stands in ruined strongholds, and desperate counterattacks. The enemy pressed their advantage, relentless and unyielding. General Seric Kane's voice was steady, but laced with grim resolve. "We must hold the line here. If Casavela is lost, the northern sector will collapse." Morn's eyes met Kane's, a silent understanding passing between them. A fragile alliance forged in the crucible of war and betrayal. Yet beneath the surface, the fractures in their command grew deeper. Whispers of dissent and treachery lingered like poison, threatening to unravel their fragile unity. That night, beneath a sky darkened by smoke, Morn walked the streets of the fallen casa. He saw the faces of the survivors, haunted, determined, broken. Each step was a reminder of the cost of empire. As he paused before a shattered monument to the saints of Cadia, he felt the weight of immortality pressing down, the endless cycle of rise and fall, of sacrifice and loss. The ashes of Casavela were the iron of their resolve, tempered by fire but scarred forever. The endless siege had become Cadia's grim heartbeat, a slow, relentless pulse of war and despair that echoed through the shattered casas and battered ramparts. The sky above was a roiling canvas of swirling storms and sickly light, a mirror to the unyielding conflict that consumed the fortress world. Lord Castellan Varrock Morn moved through the war-torn streets of Casa Mirac, his armour scarred but unbowed. The faces around him were drawn tight with exhaustion and fear, yet still burning with fierce determination. Each citizen, soldier, and officer carried the weight of centuries in their eyes, a legacy of sacrifice and endless vigilance. In the command spire, the council gathered once more, their voices heavy with weariness and cautious hope. The losses were profound, but the defenders had not broken. Against overwhelming odds, they held firm, a beacon of resistance in a galaxy spiraling toward chaos. Commissar Elaine Dregg spoke with the cold clarity of a blade. The enemy's assaults grow more desperate. Their commanders know time is not on their side. General Seric Kane nodded, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "We have weathered storms before. The key is endurance." But beneath the surface, tension simmered. The shadows of betrayal still lingered, festering in whispered accusations and stolen glances. Trust was a currency in short supply, and every decision carried the risk of fracture. Morn's thoughts drifted to the pact beneath the ice, the ancient secret that had bound Cadia's fate for millennia. The cost of that pact was becoming clearer with each passing day. The fortress world was the shield and the sword, but even the strongest blade could be broken. Outside, the enemy gathered for another assault. The ground trembled as monstrous engines of war advanced, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The defenders steeled themselves, knowing this battle could decide the fate of all they held dear. As the siege dragged on, Morn found himself grappling not only with the enemy without, but with the creeping despair within. The war was eternal, the price unpayable, and the future uncertain. Yet in the darkest hour, the spirit of Cadia endured. A flicker of light amid the storm. The air hung heavy with the scent of ozone and burnt metal, as the last embers of the shattered battlefield smouldered beneath a sky choked with ash. The war-torn plains of Cadia bore silent witness to a tragedy deeper than any siege or assault. The fracturing of brotherhood forged in blood and fire, sundered by the relentless tides of ambition and betrayal. Lord Castellan Varric Morn stood amidst the ruins of Castle Myrac's outer defences, his armour scorched, his face etched with sorrow and unyielding resolve. Before him, the remnants of once proud warriors limped and gathered, their eyes hollow from loss, their spirits fractured by secrets long buried, but now torn wide open. The enemy was relentless, their forces pressing harder, but it was the betrayal within that bled the deepest wounds. Morn's closest friend and lieutenant, Captain Arik Varl, had been unmasked as a traitor, a man seduced by promises whispered in shadow, whose ambitions had shattered the fragile unity of Cadia's defenders. Their confrontation had been brutal and heartbreaking, a clash not only of weapons, but of souls. Varl had spoken of visions and promises, a new order rising from the ashes, one that would transcend the endless cycle of war. Morn had answered with steel and grief, knowing that loyalty once broken was a wound that never truly healed. As the dust settled, the survivors grappled with the weight of their choices. Trust was shattered, alliances fractured, and the bonds of brotherhood broken beyond repair. In the council chamber, voices rose in anger and despair. General Seric Cain urged pragmatism, but even he was haunted by doubts. Commissar Elaine Drake's gaze was fierce with determination to root out the poison, yet sorrow shadowed her eyes. Morn walked alone to the Hall of Saints, seeking solace among the silent statues that bore witness to ages of sacrifice. The ghosts of heroes past seemed to watch with knowing eyes, as if to remind him that every empire, no matter how grand, bore the scars of its own undoing. The Sundering was not just a battle lost or won. It was a fracture in the soul of Cadia, a moment where hope and despair collided in a violent crucible. As the final embers of day faded, Morn knew that what remained would be forged anew, or consumed utterly by the gathering darkness. The final light of Cadia flickered like a dying star, waning beneath a sky ripped open by the chaos of war. The air was thick with ash and sorrow, carrying the bitter scent of sacrifice and shattered dreams. In the heart of Casa Mirac, the once indomitable fortress lay scarred and broken. Its walls crumbled beneath the relentless assault of an enemy that cared not for mercy. Lord Castellan Varric Morn moved through the ruins with slow, deliberate steps, his armor battered but his spirit unyielding. Around him the surviving defenders clung to life and hope, fragments of a once great empire fighting against the tide of oblivion. The echoes of countless battles lingered in every stone, every shadow. Commissar Elaine Drake stood at his side, her eyes sharp and resolute, despite the weariness that tugged at her features. "This is the hour we either stand as legends or fall into oblivion," she said quietly. Morn nodded, his gaze fixed on the shattered horizon where the enemy's dark banners fluttered in the choking winds. Cadia's fate will be written in blood and fire. But even as the fortress falls, the spirit of its people endures. The battle had reached its brutal crescendo. Enemy forces poured through breaches in the walls, their fury matched only by the desperate resistance of Cadia's defenders. Bolter fire roared, chainsword screamed, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of war engines. Yet amid the chaos, a deeper struggle raged, a final test of loyalty, sacrifice, and the cost of immortality. Lord Castellan Morn faced not only the enemy without, but the ghosts within. Memories of comrades lost, betrayals endured, and choices that had fractured the soul of an empire. As the walls crumbled and the defenders' ranks thinned, Morn made a fateful decision. To save what remained, he would sacrifice himself, leading a final charge to buy time for the evacuation of those who could still flee. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of a man who understood the price of hope. For Cadia, for the Imperium, stand fast and hold the line. The defenders rallied, their spirits ignited by his resolve. Morn charged into the fray, a beacon of defiance amid the storm. In the end, as the last breath of Cadia was drawn, the fortress world fell, not in silence, but with a roar that echoed through the stars. The empire had crumbled, but its legacy endured, in stories whispered among survivors, in the hearts of those who carried its memory, and in the eternal struggle against the darkness. The dying light of Cadia flickered, its final breath swallowed by the void like a star extinguished in endless night. The once proud fortress world lay broken, its shattered stones cloaked in ash and silence. Where once banners fluttered beneath the pale suns, now only whispers remained, echoes of a forgotten hope swallowed by the dark. Lord Castellan Varric Morn's body had long since fallen beneath the ruins of Casa Mirac, but his spirit lingered, a silent sentinel bound by the weight of sacrifice and the unyielding burden of immortality. In the shadowed halls where saints once walked, memories swirled like restless ghosts, faces of comrades lost, promises broken, and the cruel cost of power that defied time itself. The galaxy turned, indifferent to the fate of a single world. Empires rose and fell like tides beneath the cold gaze of distant stars. But Cadia's story, its rise, its fall, remained etched in the fabric of history, a testament to the fragile dance between hope and despair. Among the survivors, whispers told of a pact forged beneath frozen ice, a secret debt that had doomed them to endless war. They spoke of betrayal that cut deeper than any blade, and of loyalty that demanded the ultimate sacrifice. Yet in the void between the stars, a question lingered. What price could ever be paid for immortality when time itself seemed the cruelest enemy? Commissar Elaine Dreg, now a shadow of the fierce woman she once was, stood beneath a sky heavy with dying suns. Her eyes, hardened by loss, reflected the endless night. "We fought for a world that would not stand," she murmured. "But in our fall, we became something more, an ember in the darkness, a warning, a legacy." The remnants of Cadia's defenders scattered across the galaxy, carrying with them the scars of war and the burden of memory. Their sacrifices were silent prayers echoing through the void. As the stars grew cold and silent, the story of Cadia remained, an eternal reminder that even in the face of oblivion, the light of hope flickers, fragile but unbroken.